something educational and inspiring. We have a Q&A now with one of the country's leading CEOs. He's led some of the country's best-known consumer businesses. So please welcome to the stage, make a lot of noise, for the CEO of John Lewis Partnership, Nish Kankiwala. Come on, look at this. Brilliant.
Can't leave now.
This is a room full of people who shop in Waitrose, so you're in good company here. You're in very good company.
I know who you are.
Yeah. Everyone's got a Waitrose loyalty card in this building. Don't worry about that, Nish. Don't worry about that. Okay, look, it's great to have you here. Brilliant to have you here. I wanted to start first with growing up, leaving India and coming to Walthamstow, which of course is every Indian's dream, to land in Walthamstow. Just tell us about what you saw from your parents, how they worked, what they did to kind of inspire you.
Well, I mean, I don't know how many people have been to Walthamstow. It's not as it is today, I can tell you that. So we came over in the 60s, and my mother and father basically came over to better the life. No real money, came with basically nothing. And when we arrived in Stratford and Walthamstow, every few months we'd get moved on because obviously we were slightly the wrong hue of color. And so we sort of moved around and lived there. I went to school there and came over with my sister. But
do you remember that as a kid? Do you remember the fact that for you housing was quite insecure?
Yeah, it was really weird because when you go to school, most of your mates live in the same house for the whole of that year. We tended to move house every 3 months, and my mum had this trick of making sure the masalas that we would have to make the shark in the evening was in one dabba, and then we'd be in the suitcase with all the other stuff, and we'd be ready to move that afternoon. So yeah, we moved around a lot because we couldn't stay because the landladies normally kicked us out. So it was a rotating set of housing conditions. Yeah.
What did you, I mean, as a young Nish, what did you make of that? How kind of different your childhood was to your school friends' childhood?
Yeah, I mean, of course, in the 60s, even in Walthamstow and the East End of London, there were not many Indian people. The East Asian, East African immigration hadn't occurred, so you were the only sort of brown person in the class. And what I found really interesting was that after a while, most of my mates forgot the color. And so, we support Spurs, as you do, Nihal. Proper team.
Yes.
Thank you. 2
Tottenham fans on the stage, ladies and gentlemen. All Arsenal fans kindly leave through the exits there and there and there.
That's right, the North London losers. So, I mean, the Arsenal. So, no, we sort of got to, we got to, make some really good friends. And what really surprised me is when we had, families from Kenya, Uganda, when that happened. Obviously, skinheads were around, and it was a tough place to go to school. Some of my mates said, "Well, we're going to send them all home." I said, "Well, why?" So, well, they're whatever. They're not from this country. I said, "I'm not from this country. I came from India." "Oh, yeah, but you're one of us." And then I realized something had happened, that you were integrated, and my mum and dad both worked. My dad worked in British Gas as an accountant, and my mum was a secretary. And so, we all worked. I worked, as you know, at a stall on Walthamstow Market. I stacked tins of beans at Tesco on the Saturday. Basically, any job I could to earn money for the family. So that's how we did it.
You've, Nish, had an extraordinary career. Where did it start? Who was the first person that you could say, or the first business that gave you that chance, that saw something in you?
I mean, I left university. I read chemical engineering. Again, it's another story as to how I ended up doing that in the first place. Um, and I was going to go to BP as an engineer. I had a job at BP, all ready to go. And then I met somebody who said, "Why don't you come and do a selection board at Unilever, which is for a management trainee?" And I thought, well, I've already got a job, really well paid job, working in oil. Um, and I went for this selection board, and they said, "Look, the deal here is that at the end of these 2 days, we know you better than you know yourself." So that's started my sort of thinking of that's quite an ambitious or arrogant statement. Let's see what happens. Anyway, it turned out to be true. So I didn't go to BP, and I became a management trainee at Lever Brothers selling soap powder. That was my first job. And
Persil, was it?
was Persil.
It was.
Yeah. Hope you still remember that. And in those days, used to sell Persil out the back of a Passat estate, for those that still remember. And your bonus was based on how much you sold. So that's how I started as a sales rep selling soap powder.
What is it that drives you? Well, apart from a Passat, what is it that actually is the driving force behind where you've got to? Now you can look back
Yeah.
on a very successful career, which is still ongoing, it has to be said. What is it that drives you?
I mean, look at the amazing success in this room. There's 160 billion pounds of wealth here. I think for all of us, at least certainly for me, it's always been about the fact that I know I can do better than this. Whatever this is, I know there's another this that goes past it. So, it's been sort of instilled when I saw my mother and father strive. We didn't have a house um, until we were really late, and then we bought our first shop. Um, but it was always about, I know I can do better tomorrow than I did today. And that's still to this day, I fundamentally believe that, which is there's always something better you can do.
How did you become so good at turning businesses around? Because that's an interesting thing, isn't it? You know, at Hovis, the job you did at Hovis, what you've done at John Lewis Partnership. But where does that come from?
Yeah, I don't know, actually. I wish I had the answer to that. But um, I mean, I've been very lucky that I had two very good schools. One was Unilever for 15 years, and then I worked at PepsiCo for 10 years, and for some of that time with Indra Nui, who was my boss. So you certainly learn something with Indra, or you're basically out. So I thought I'd better learn something. Um, I think the fundamental thing is I love being the underdog. When I ran the Burger King business, it was 4,000 restaurants worldwide, and somebody said, "Well, McDonald's is the number one." When I ran PepsiCo, somebody said Coke is the number one. When I ran Hovis, so it's always that element of being the underdog, being the one that nobody believes you can actually win. And when you have that, you want to prove everybody wrong. And so for me, turning businesses around on the whole, and when I took John Lewis, there was a real view that I didn't have the skills, nor did I have the ability to turn it around, but I was determined, and we did. So, I mean, I have a view as to how I do these things, but it's the sheer determination to prove people wrong, fundamentally.
That's interesting. We'll get into that in a minute, actually, as when you joined John Lewis, there were those.
Time is running out, Nihal.
Oh, no, we're keeping this going as long as we can, Nish, because we still haven't talked about Ange Postecoglou and the High
Oh,
Line.
yeah. That's a real turnaround.
It's a real turnaround. So the thing about getting to a business and then turning it around, what is it that you have to identify first? You come into a business, it is clearly heading southwards. Where do you look first?
I mean, unfortunately or fortunately, I've had 20 years of this sort of trait, and I never know whether turnarounds search me or I search turnarounds. I've never actually worked out how the marriage has worked. I think the thing that I've learned in that, and I'm not saying this is the right answer, but certainly it's worked for me, is the closest you get to the point where you're talking to a customer of anything is when you get to know the real truth. And I can give you many examples, whether it's Hovis or Burger King or parts of PepsiCo or even John Lewis. It's the essence of having the truth of what a customer actually believes is true. And most corporations tend to mask that with data, science, and normal gobbledygook. And I'm a firm believer that that is the point that makes the difference in a turnaround. When you get that bit right, and you really get it right, it clicks. And most people don't. Most turnarounds fail because they don't actually understand the true essence of what a customer actually wants. I mean, you get lots of data and analysis, whether it's from Nielsen or other uh, well-known companies, but on the whole, and I can give you a couple of examples. When I took over Hovis, again doing very poorly, a lovely brand in the UK, um, and I was told by the team there that we had the best quality in the country of bread, and all the data proved it. I mean, 100%, we were the best, better than others. Um, and I remember talking to customers, and they just said, I just don't think that's right. And you soon realize that internally we measured everything about bread, the color, size, all those great things. What we forgot is that customers don't actually eat bread. They eat toast and they eat sandwiches. And the fundamental difference I made in that business is I bought everybody a toaster. And from that point onwards, we chose quality by how bread was actually consumed as compared to how bread was actually made. And that, over 7 years, we became the fastest growing bread company in the UK. And we sold that business to another private equity firm. And it's moments like that that really strip away the myths and the data that really cloud the issue. And it takes that essence of being honest about what the customer really wants and how the customer sees your product, whatever it may be, then the next bit happens. But that's the bit that I always find, and I can give you loads of examples where big corporations have forgotten that.
So then, because you mentioned the word data science a few times, what I'm interested in is where is the space left for human instinct and intuition when you're faced with perhaps young data scientists who are telling you, but that's not right? Where's the space left for that instinct and intuition and basic human psychology?
Yeah, I mean, there is growingly data, and AI is all around us in so many ways. And large scale machine learning or machine learning generally allows one to process data at a speed and a capacity that we never dreamt of even 2 years ago, let alone 20 years ago. The problem with that is the human interface. And technology that we're now starting to see needs to enable better human decisions as compared to replace human decisions. And that's the bit I think AI will suddenly start to provide, which is the ability to, if you look at John Lewis, we now know, for example, how people are searching. There's lots of data. But what's really fascinating is that we know you so well that sometimes we forget that we don't actually know you that well. And so the ability to take data and then add the human instinct is the essence of what I think will be the future as compared to basically replacing humans with data science solely. Data science, AI, and all those things will be very helpful, but I don't think they are a replacement of, they're an enabler and an enhancer of human instinct.
So when you became CEO of John Lewis Partnership, the partnership had never had a CEO before. It's the first time.
Yeah.
And there were some eyebrows raised within the industry retail about you as a choice. If a company isn't doing that well, which John Lewis certainly wasn't at the point you came in as CEO, why not get someone with a stronger retail background? And that was the questions that were being asked. What was your reaction to that?
Yeah, wasn't very nice, was it? I mean, it's the media for you. Oh, sorry, Neil. I mean, I've come across this problem before when I took over Burger King. I was running PepsiCo, and somebody said, "You've never actually run retail." and overnight I was running 3,500 restaurants worldwide. Um, and I can give you many examples. I think that I've learned to not listen. Fundamentally, I don't care, um, because as those external
You shut those voices out, do you?
totally,
Right, okay.
it's irrelevant. I mean, as you know, I do very very little press. I think I've done one interview in 2 years. It's my second. Um, I don't.
We are honored, ladies and gentlemen. We are honored. We're honored. We are.
I shut it out because I know that's most important as a leader, to know your strengths and most importantly, to know those areas where you're weak and surround yourself with those that can support your weakness and enhance your strengths. So I know myself. I know I have a certain approach to turnarounds. Um, and, I always say that results speak louder than words. And on the whole, that's what I've believed in.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, you're looking at the man who's turned around John Lewis Partnership in just 2 years.
Yeah.
In just 2 years, ladies and gentlemen. I mean, that is an extraordinary achievement, without question. I'd like to ask you about your biggest mistakes and what you've learned from them. Because quite often in rooms such as this, we talk about the successes, but we learn most from our mistakes, actually. Builds resilience. We understand why we do. I mean, fail quickly if you're going to fail,
Yeah.
but learn from it.
I mean, fail quickly is a very, very important piece of.
We're Tottenham fans, we know.
We know. We do it most Saturdays, unfortunately. I mean, I think I've had, many areas where I've sort of got it wrong. I mean, a couple of examples perhaps are useful and maybe instructive. One is that on the whole, I've been sometimes over patient, in terms of um, not making the organizational changes that you need to make. Um, because when you're basically turning around businesses, um, it is important to build capability ahead of the state of the business. And it's really important because you've got to be at least one generation ahead so that the business has the capacity to achieve that. And the mistakes I've made in the past is to have organizations which are fit for today's business and not able to drive the business to the next level. So that's a really important thing I learned, certainly at PepsiCo, where we're surrounded with fantastic executives. Pepsi's very lucky. But I started to build businesses when I was running Europe and Africa, which are ready for today. And then when we decided to basically have a business after the redesign that we did with Indra, we were not just selling brown liquid. We were selling um, Tropicana and very many other products. And what I should have done is built a management team and a board that had the capability to build a drinks business as compared to a cola business. And that took me back about a year's worth of growth for a £4 billion business. And that was quite material. So that's one. And I think the second one is that certainly in the early part of my career, I mistook tactics for strategy, and seeing things for what they were sometimes very sort of uh, sort of tactical in their nature, and things that failed, brands or other things that failed. But inherently behind it was a strategy that was basically broken. And if you take too long to fundamentally play with just tactics on their own, especially when you're running global businesses, you sometimes lose a huge amount of time to accept that strategically you're actually in the wrong place. Um, and strategy fundamentally is about two simple questions. One is, where do you want to play as a business? And secondly, how do you win? And if you get those two questions broadly right and execute it very well, on the whole, businesses tend to thrive.
And lastly, one thing I'm very interested in is you can go into a business and say processes need to be changed, but is there any point in trying to change processes before you try and change culture? Because the cultural change sometimes, I mean, we have Labour MPs here, the Labour Party now from the Jeremy Corbyn Labour is a completely different party, and that's culture change and fit for government, etc., etc. Similarly, in the companies you've worked with, changing the culture, how difficult is that?
I I have a belief that culture is the culmination of consistent behavior. When people talk about how do they do things here, they tend to describe how organizations and people behave on a constant basis. And so my perspective is that that's what has to change first. Galvanizing any organization, whether it's Spurs or PepsiCo or even John Lewis, is fundamentally about changing the hearts and minds. And that has more of an importance than changing process. Because at that point, you've got intent before you've actually got process. And that is, in my world, a much more powerful way of running businesses and ones which are much more sustainable. Process change without culture change tends to fail.
And are we going to finish above Chelsea and Arsenal this season, Nish?
Who are Chelsea and Arsenal? I expect so. Let's hope so.
Well, Chelsea, no one cares, but
Exactly.
I mean Arsenal. I mean it's
exactly. Definitely above Arsenal.
That might be. Let's hope so. Ladies and gentlemen, the CEO of John Lewis Partnership, Nish Kankiwala.